The moment Tessa realized the man she had just shoved into a coat rack at the hospital, Gala was standing at the front of the boardroom the next morning. As the new chief of surgery, she genuinely considered faking a medical emergency to avoid eye contact. It had started the way most disasters in Tessa's life did, with good intentions and terrible timing. The gala was an annual fundraiser held at the Fairmont in downtown Vancouver, organized by St. Clement's Hospital to court donors and celebrate the cardiology department's research milestones. Tessa was only there because her colleague Petra had begged her to come as moral support. Petra hated these events alone. Too many name tags, too much small talk, too many men in expensive suits who asked what your husband did for a living before they asked your name. Tessa had spotted Petra across the room near the bar, and the look on her friend's face was all wrong. Not bored wrong, frightened wrong. A man in a gray suit stood too close to her, one hand cupped around her elbow in the way that looked polite from a distance but wasn't. Tessa didn't think. She crossed the room, stepped between them, and when she planted her hand firmly against the man's chest to push him back, he stumbled sideways into a freestanding coat rack near the entrance. It clattered. Several heads turned. He looked at her with the expression of someone who had never once in his life been pushed. Tessa held his gaze. She said she needed air. I think that means it's time to give her some. He said nothing. He straightened his jacket, picked up a coat that had fallen, and walked away without a word. Petra grabbed Tessa's wrist. Do you know who that is? Tessa had no idea, and she didn't particularly care. She found out the next morning. St. Clement's had been searching for a new chief of surgery for 7 months. The previous chief had retired, and the administrative board had been secretive about the replacement, which had generated the usual amount of hallway speculation. When Tessa arrived at the hospital that Tuesday and took the elevator up to the 3rd floor, she nearly walked straight past the boardroom, where the welcome meeting had already started. She slipped in through the side door and found a seat near the back. The hospital's director of operations was speaking. And we're grateful to welcome Dr. Callum Reed, who joins us from Toronto General where he served as. Tessa looked up. The man at the front of the room looked up at the same moment. Recognition was immediate. She watched it cross his face, a flicker contained almost at once behind an expression of practiced calm. The faintest suggestion of something that might have been amusement, if amusement could be surgical. Tessa looked back down at the notepad in her hands. She had written nothing on it. She stared at the blank lines and told herself, very firmly, that this was fine. It was not fine. She was 31 years old, a second-year resident in internal medicine, and she had just shoved the new chief of surgery into a coat rack the night before. The meeting ended and she moved toward the door with the focused intention of someone who had somewhere very important to be. She made it to the hallway. Dr. Nguyen. She stopped. He had already learned her name. Of course he had. She turned. Callum Reed was taller than she'd registered at the gala, or maybe it was the white coat. He had the kind of face that was difficult to read quickly, composed, even-featured, giving very little away. I don't believe we've been properly introduced, he said. I'm Callum Reed, I know, she said. I'm Tessa. Yes. He paused. I've already reviewed the resident roster. Your 2nd year internal medicine. Good record. Another pause shorter. Nice to meet you under different circumstances. He walked away. Tessa stood in the hallway for a moment longer than she needed to. She called her mother that evening from her apartment in Kitsilano, while eating leftover pho straight from the container. How was work? Her mom asked. Fine. Great. Normal. You sound strange. I'm eating. You always sound like that when something happened, and you don't want to tell me. Her mom had an accurate and inconvenient radar. Is it a man? Mom. Is it a patient? No, it's nothing. I pushed my new boss into a coat rack at a charity event, and now I have to see him every day for the foreseeable future. A pause. You pushed him. He was bothering my friend, Tessa. Her mom's voice softened into the particular register she used when she was simultaneously concerned and impressed. That's my girl. Was he angry? He didn't seem anything. That's somehow worse. She could hear her mom covering a smile. Come home this weekend. Your dad keeps asking about you. And bring that friend of yours. Petra, the one you're always talking about. Tessa promised to try, said goodbye, and finished her pho in the quiet of her apartment with the lights of English Bay visible through the kitchen window. Over the following weeks, life at St. Clement's settled into its rhythms. Tessa kept her head down, worked long shifts, and told herself she was not specifically aware of whether Callum Reed was in the building on any given day. This was a lie she maintained with moderate success. He had a way of appearing in doorways at unexpected moments. Consulting on a case in the ICU, reviewing charts at the nursing station, asking the kind of questions during rounds that made residents reassess whether they actually understood what they thought they understood. He never singled her out. He also never treated her as though the gala had not happened. It occupied a precise middle ground that she found more unsettling than either extreme would have been. Petra noticed. "You get a look on your face," Petra told her one afternoon in the resident lounge. "I don't have a look, you do, when he walks by. It's like someone pressed pause on you for a second." "I'm concentrating." "On what?" "Medicine, the practice of." Petra laughed and stole the last of Tessa's coffee. The hospital's Autumn Research Symposium was held in early October, a 2-day event that brought in speakers from across the country. Tessa had submitted a case report on an unusual presentation of atrial fibrillation in a young patient, and to her genuine surprise, it had been selected for a short presentation slot on the second day. She was proud of it. She had worked hard on it. She was also quietly terrified. The evening before her presentation, she was in the residence library running through her slides for the 4th time when she heard a knock on the open door. Callum stood in the doorway. "Working late," he said. "Not a question." "Presentation tomorrow. Internal medicine case report. You're probably not interested." She turned back to her laptop screen, then stopped herself. "Actually, would you be willing to look at one section? I can't figure out if the diagnostic reasoning is clear enough or if I'm too inside it." She hadn't planned to ask. It came out before the more cautious version of her could intervene. He came in, set down his coffee, and sat across from her. He read the section she indicated with the focused attention of someone who actually reads things rather than scanning them. He asked 3 questions. His suggestions were precise and genuinely useful, the kind that clarified without changing the voice of the work. "This is good," he said when he handed the laptop back. "The case is interesting. You saw something a lot of residents would have missed. It was a professional observation. She received it professionally. She did not think about it for the rest of the evening. She thought about it for the rest of the evening. Her presentation went well." Afterward, Petra ambushed her in the hallway with a hug that nearly knocked her over, and 2 of her attending physicians stopped to tell her it was one of the better residents' presentations they'd seen. She was still smiling when she walked past the atrium and nearly collided with Callum coming the other direction. "Good presentation," he said. "Thank you for last night," she said. The feedback helped. Something in his expression shifted, not much, but she caught it. Anytime. She walked away before she could say something that would complicate matters. That evening, Petra called her while she was grocery shopping at the Granville Island Market. "I have to tell you something," Petra said. Tessa put down a container of soup. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong with me. I need to tell you something before you hear it somewhere else." A pause. "I like Callum." Tessa was very still for a moment. "Okay, I've liked him for a few weeks. Since the gala, actually. I know he's technically above us, but it's not a direct supervision situation, and I looked up the cost and Petra. It's okay." Tessa kept her voice even. Something had gone quiet and careful in her chest, in the way you go quiet around something you don't want to examine too closely. "You should go for it, if that's what you want. You don't think it's a terrible idea? I think you should do what makes you happy." She said goodbye, paid for her groceries, and drove home in the November rain with the radio on low. She made dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, and told herself firmly and clearly that she was fine. She liked Petra. She wanted good things for Petra. Whatever quiet feeling had been growing in her chest over the past 2 months was not relevant. It was a workplace dynamic and a misread of simple professional respect, and she was going to let it go. She let it go. She stopped attending the resident case review sessions that Callum ran on Wednesday evenings, sending detailed written notes with a colleague instead. She declined when the senior resident suggested she present at the next department meeting, citing a schedule conflict that was technically true and also convenient. She was polite. She was professional. She was thorough in her disappearing act. 2 weeks into this approach, she was called to his office. She stood outside the door for longer than she intended. "Come in," he said from inside before she knocked. She had not knocked. She pushed the door open. He was at his desk reviewing something, and he set it aside when she entered. "Sit down, Dr. Nguyen." She sat. "You haven't been at case review. Schedule conflict. For 3 consecutive Wednesdays. It's been a complicated month." He looked at her steadily. "You're one of the better residents in this hospital. I would rather know why you're suddenly absent from the work than pretend I haven't noticed." She opened her mouth to produce another reasonable explanation. What came out instead was, "It's a personal matter, not related to work. I apologize if it's affected anything." He was quiet for a moment. "It hasn't. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." She looked at him. He looked back. I'm all right, she said. It was the most honest conversation she had managed in 3 weeks, which said something she didn't want to think about too carefully. She went back to case review the following Wednesday. December came, which in Vancouver meant rain with brief optimistic pauses and everyone indoors with too much coffee. The hospital's holiday dinner was held at a restaurant in Yaletown, a casual event, no dress code, the kind of thing you attended for 45 minutes and then had a legitimate excuse to leave. Tessa went, sat with Petra and the other second years, and was genuinely having a reasonable time until she saw Callum across the room talking to the director of cardiology. He was in a navy sweater, slightly less formal than she was used to, and laughing at something the cardiologist had said. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind that changes a person's face. She had not seen him laugh like that before. She looked away. Petra appeared at her elbow. Are you okay? Fine. I'm getting more water. She stood at the bar waiting for the bartender and became aware of someone standing beside her. Water? Callum said. Yes, and then I have to be somewhere. It's a Friday. At 8 p.m. Early morning tomorrow. He waited. Tessa. It was the first time he had used her first name without the title attached. She looked up. I owe you an explanation, he said. About the gala. About the man you pushed me away from. He paused, and she realized she had misread the entire memory. He's a donor. A significant donor. He also has 3 complaints filed against him by event staff that the board has quietly ignored for 2 years. What you did, he stopped. No one has done that. Stood between him and someone he was pressuring. I should have said something sooner. I've been trying to work out how to say it without it becoming awkward. She stared at him. I thought you were the one bothering Petra. The corner of his mouth moved. I was trying to steer her toward the exit. Oh, she said, a considerable silence. I'm going to get your water, he said, and turned to the bartender. And she stood there recalibrating the entire past 3 months. That night she walked home along the seawall because she needed the cold air and the sound of the water. Her phone rang. Petra. I have to tell you something else, Petra said. Another thing? I talked to him tonight, Callum. A pause. He was perfectly kind. And also, Tessa, he asked about you, like specifically, twice, and not in a colleague way. Tessa stopped walking. Ahead of her, the lights of the North Shore were reflected in the black water of Burrard Inlet. I think, Petra said carefully, that I had a crush on the idea of him. And I think you've been turning yourself inside out, trying not to have feelings about someone that you actually have feelings about. And I'm telling you this, as your friend who knows you. I've been trying not to make things difficult for you. Tessa. I'm fine. I was never. It wasn't serious. Go be ridiculous with your feelings about your chief of surgery. She laughed, which surprised her. You make it sound so straightforward. It's not. But so what? She stood at the seawall a little longer after hanging up. The rain had stopped. She could see her breath in the cold air. She went back to the restaurant. Callum was still there, talking to no one in particular near the door with his coat already on. He looked up when she came in from outside, her cheeks red from the cold. She walked directly to him. I went for a walk, she said, and I came back to say something. All right, I think you're a good surgeon and a fair department head, and also one of the most difficult people to read that I have ever encountered in a professional setting. And for the past 3 months, I have been trying extremely hard to feel nothing about that. He was quiet for exactly long enough that she began to wonder if she had made a significant error. How's that working? He said. Badly, she admitted. He smiled. Fully, for the first time, the kind of smile that matched the laugh she had seen across the room earlier. She understood why she had looked away before. It was difficult to look at directly. Can I take you for coffee? He said. Not tonight. I know you have an early morning. But soon, yes, she said. Soon. January in Vancouver was still dark and damp, but there was something about it Tessa had always liked. The way the city went quiet after the holidays, the long evenings with good reason to stay inside. She and Callum had coffee on a Saturday, which became dinner the following week, which became the kind of slow and deliberate thing that suited them both. He was from Halifax, originally. He had moved for a fellowship and stayed because the mountains were too hard to leave. He had one younger sister in Calgary who sent him aggressive opinion texts about restaurants and hockey. He was a careful cook who read novels on the weekend and ran along the seawall in the early mornings in all weather. She told him about her parents, her mom who had emigrated from Vietnam in the 90s and had an opinion about everything and was never wrong, and her dad who said very little and thought everything through twice before speaking, and had, according to her mother, been in love with the idea of Tessa becoming a doctor since the moment she was born. You'd get along with him, she said. You have the same, measured quality. Your mother would interrogate me. relentlessly. She'd like you anyway. He drove her home. At the door of her building, he held her gaze for a moment. I'm glad you came back to the restaurant, he said. Me too. She was still smiling when she unlocked her apartment. Petra was waiting inside. She had a key for emergencies, which apparently now included ambushing Tessa for a full debrief. They sat on the kitchen floor with tea, and Petra made her describe everything in excessive detail and reacted with appropriate theatrical commentary. And by midnight, they were both laughing about something entirely unrelated to any of it. The rest of the winter passed. Spring came early that year, the cherry blossoms on the UBC campus arriving in late February in a burst that felt unearned after the months of gray. Callum brought her flowers once, actual tulips from the market on the way to her apartment, not a grand gesture, just Tuesday. And she put them in a mug because she didn't own a vase and he teased her about it without mercy. She took him to meet her parents in late March because her mom had stopped asking and started simply stating facts. I assume you have a boyfriend. I assume we will meet him. I assume this will happen soon. Her mom answered the door, sized Callum up in approximately 4 seconds, said, come in, we made too much food, and proceeded to make him describe his entire surgical career while he helped set the table. Her dad shook his hand and asked him 2 questions, and then nodded the nod that Tessa had learned over 31 years meant he had made up his mind about someone. On the drive back to the city, she said, my dad likes you. He barely spoke to me. That's how he shows it. Callum was quiet for a moment, looking at the highway ahead. Then, your mom told me you were a stubborn child who always wanted to solve other people's problems. That's not inaccurate. She also told me I'm the first person you've ever brought home. He glanced at her. She seemed pleased about that. Quietly. She's always quietly pleased and loudly critical. It's her whole approach. They drove the rest of the way with music on low, and the windows cracked, and she thought, not for the first time, that this was the specific shape of the thing she had spent 3 months trying not to want. She would later think about what happened next and understand that the calm of those weeks was the kind that arrives before things break open. Petra had a cousin named Willa, who was vivacious and persuasive, and had an instinct for inserting herself into the center of things. Tessa had met her twice at hospital events and found her pleasant enough in an exhausting way. Willa worked in hospital administration and had, it turned out, developed a focused interest in Callum. Tessa only understood the extent of this later. Willa was careful. She didn't approach Callum directly at first. Instead, she found other ways in. Stopping by his office with administrative paperwork that didn't strictly require his attention, mentioning Tessa in small poisoned ways, the kind of comments that were deniable individually but built a picture over time. She told Callum that Tessa had been seen having dinner with an attending physician and had seemed very comfortable with him. She implied, not quite said, that Tessa was the kind of person who kept options open. She delivered these things with an expression of concern that was very convincing. Tessa noticed that Callum became quieter. She asked him once if something was He said no, work was demanding, which was true. She believed him because she trusted him. Petra noticed first. Willa's been talking to him, Petra told her, in the flat tone of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have. I don't know exactly what she's been saying, but she's been saying things. I overheard a piece of it last week and I didn't want to tell you without being sure, but I'm sure now. Tessa said nothing for a moment. What did you hear? That you'd said Callum was convenient. That you'd said the relationship was good for your career. The coldness that moved through her had nothing to do with temperature. She went to find Callum that evening. He was in his office. She shut the door behind her. Something has been wrong for 2 weeks, she said. I'd like to know what it is. He looked at her. Something uncomfortable moved across his face. I've been hearing things. From Willa's. A pause. He sat back. You know. I know she's been saying things. Tell me what she said and I'll tell you if any of it is true. He told her. She listened to all of it, the alleged dinner with the attending, the comments she had supposedly made, the suggestions about her motives. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The dinner was a department birthday for Dr. Okafor, who is 63 and has been married for 30 years and mentored me through my first year of residency. 20 people were there. You can ask any of them. She looked at him directly. And I have never said anything like the rest of it. Not to anyone. Not about you. He studied her face. The silence was long and careful. I know, he said finally. I think I knew. I let doubt get ahead of what I actually had evidence for. That's not. I should have asked you sooner. Yes, she said. You should have. I'm sorry. She took a breath. I need you to understand something about me. I don't do this easily. I haven't done this before. If you have a question about something you've heard, I need you to ask me directly rather than let it sit. Can you do that? Yes, he said. I can do that, she nodded. She stayed. They talked for another hour, the kind of conversation that costs something but earns something back. Willa's role in what had happened came out gradually, and clearly enough that both Petra and Callum understood it without ambiguity. Petra confronted her cousin with the controlled precision of someone who had prepared exactly what she wanted to say. Willa denied portions and deflected the rest. Within 6 weeks, she had moved to a different department in a different building, a practical outcome that suited everyone. Tessa didn't spend much time on it. She had other things to think about. It was Callum who brought it up first. They were cooking dinner at his apartment in Mount Pleasant. She had finally stopped burning rice, which felt like personal growth. And he said, while not quite looking at her, "I've been thinking about how much longer your residency runs. 14 months. And I've been thinking about what comes after that. Where you'd want to practice. What you'd want it to look like." She set down the spoon she was holding. "Why are you thinking about that?" He turned to look at her properly. "Because I'd like to factor it in. To wherever I am and what I'm doing, going forward, if you'd want the same." She looked at him, the careful way he had said it, not assuming, making room for her to answer plainly. "Yes," she said. "I'd want the same." He nodded like it was confirmed and turned back to the stove. She picked up her spoon and stirred the pot, and outside the window the lights of the city were coming on one by one against the dark blue of a spring evening, and she thought, this is what it looks like when someone makes a plan that includes you. She called her mom that night. "How is he?" her mom asked immediately. "Good. We're good. Are you happy?" Tessa considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yes," she said. "I am." Her mom made the sound that meant she was very pleased and would not be fully admitting it. "Good," she said. "Come home next weekend. Bring him, Mom. Bring him. Your dad wants to ask him things. Dad doesn't ask anyone things. He has questions. Bring him." She laughed and said she would try and said goodnight and stood by the kitchen window of her small Kitsilano apartment, looking at the lights reflected in the water. She had spent most of her adult life with a theory about how she would live it, self-sufficient, unattached, accountable only to herself and her work. She had believed it was the cleaner option, the safer one. Less exposure to the ways other people could complicate and diminish and disappoint. She thought about her mother's hands around a warm mug, her father's quiet certainty, Petra's laugh that took up half a room, Callum's face when he was trying not to smile. The theory had been wrong, and she was glad.